While gaining specialized skills is one way to compete for higher wages, traditionally workers have increased their bargaining power by uniting and negotiating as a group. Today, unions represent a variety of workers, from teachers and law enforcement officers to journalists and airline pilots, and yes, even actors.
Unions are simply a way for workers in a structured and organized way to bargain with their employers. Unions are usually organized on the basis of occupation. And the idea is that if you bargain individually with your employer, if I go into my employer and say, hey, you know, I have a lot of expenses and I've been working here for 5 years, I'd like to have my wages increase, I'm probably not going to get anywhere. But if the entire labor force in this one factory goes and asks for higher wages, that, in unity, there is strength. That was a motto of many of the early unions, understanding that together they had some power. They weren't powerless.
In the United States, the idea of unions grew out of the Industrial Revolution. As American workers traded farming for jobs in factories, they discovered that the benefits of mass production didn't always extend to those actually operating the machines.
Working conditions in the late 19th century were, to put it mildly, brutal. In many factories, the hours were long, and without a labor union and without any kinds of state laws on maximum hours, your employer could literally tell you to work every single day. And you could be asked to work 12 and 14 hours a day. And if you didn't do it, you were fired. One of the earliest group of industrial workers, factory workers in the United States, were women. They were women who worked in the New England textile mills, primarily in Lowell, but also in Waltham and other areas along the Fall River in Massachusetts. Those women came from farm households nearby in order to make money for a short period of time, and then they would go back home again.
They'd have to be at work at 5 o'clock, 5 a.m. They would work for a couple of hours, then they would break, the bell would sound, and they would break for breakfast. They would have about a half an hour to leave their place on the shop floor, go to the boarding house, have their breakfast, and then return by 7:30 to their workstation. So they had to leave very quickly, eat very quickly in the boarding house, and come back very quickly. The next bell would then break for what was called dinner. We would call it lunch now, and that would be around 12 o'clock. Again, they'd have about half an hour, and they'd have to be back by 12:30, and then they would work until about 7 or 7:30. These were all in total about 14-hour days. The biggest complaint was the air. It was very hot in the mills. They normally kept the windows closed. They wanted to maintain a fairly high humidity so that the cotton fibers, the cotton thread, would remain supple, would not become dried out and brittle and break. So there was, the factory environment was generally very warm, very humid, and there was not a lot of fresh air circulating through the mill.
So hours, working conditions, and pay. Without a union and with no legislation in any state mandating minimum wages, the wages rested at whatever level the employers could get away with. So if they could get enough workers to do the work at the lowest possible wages, that's what they could pay. Well, workers don't like that. And so those are the kinds of conditions that precipitate strikes. Beginning in the 1830s, the women of Lowell began to organize and protest their working conditions, their pay, the long hours, the speed-ups they experienced. And they did this several times over the course of the 1830s and into the 1840s.
Maybe you never thought of voting as an economic decision, but the actions of elected government officials can affect the economy and your own financial well-being in many ways. Minimum wage and child labor laws help protect workers from being exploited. Environmental regulations are set to prevent producers from polluting the environment in their pursuit of cheaper ways to produce goods. tariffs, which are taxes on imports, or custom duties, are supposed to protect American companies from foreign competition. The government also provides some goods and services, such as roads and education, which we pay for through taxes.